Watch where you're going. The voice cracked through the marble lobby like thunder. Silence followed, sharp, uncomfortable. Every head turned toward the man on his knees, scrambling to pick up a fallen mop. Thomas Gray, billionaire, untouchable, feared, towered above him, his polished shoes glinting under the lights. And with one cruel sentence, he didn't just spill water across the floor. He spilled a man's dignity. But the janitor, Derrick Cole, didn't break. He simply stood, eyes calm, voice steady. I said, "I'm sorry, sir." To Thomas, he was just another nameless worker. What he didn't know was that the man he just humiliated had once commanded soldiers, not staff. And soon he'd learn the hard way that respect isn't earned by wealth, but by the kind of power no money can buy. If you believe that power without respect is just noise, hit like and subscribe. Because in the next few minutes you'll see how one man's quiet strength brought an empire to its knees and proved that dignity doesn't bow, not even to a billionaire. Watch where you're going. The voice cut through the echoing marble lobby like a whip. Conversations stopped. Heads turned. Thomas Gray, billionaire CEO of Graytech Industries, stood at the center of the gleaming floor, glaring down at a man kneeling beside a tipped-over mop bucket. Water spread across the polished surface like a mirror reflecting humiliation. The janitor scrambled to grab his mop, muttering an apology. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't see you coming." Thomas's tone sharpened. "Of course you didn't. You people never look where you're going." A heavy silence fell. Every employee in the lobby froze mid-step. Even the receptionist stopped typing. The janitor, Derrick Cole, rose slowly, his posture calm but dignified. He was in his late 30s, tall, with steady eyes and quiet strength beneath his plain blue uniform. "I said I'm sorry, Mr. Gray." The CEO's lips curled. "You know my name?" "Yes, sir." Everyone does. Thomas's eyes flicked to the man's badge. "Derrick, is it? You've been mopping my floors for how long?" 2 years, Thomas scoffed. 2 years, and you still managed to make a mess bigger than the one you're supposed to clean. Typical. A few employees shifted uncomfortably. One young intern whispered to another, "He's going too far." Derrick simply bent down and began wiping the floor again, silent. Thomas stepped closer, his expensive leather shoes inches from the spreading water. "What's the point of hiring staff if they can't even do their job without turning this place into a swamp?" From across the lobby, Clara Gray, his daughter, exited the elevator, tablet in hand. She froze at the sight before her. "Dad, what's going on?" Thomas gestured toward Derrick. "This man just soaked the floor and almost ruined a client's briefcase." Clara frowned. "It was an accident." "Accidents happen to careless people," Thomas snapped. "And I don't tolerate carelessness in my building." Derrick wrung out the mop, still not looking up. His voice was even, but quiet. "With respect, sir, I was cleaning where you told me to." "Oh, so now you're blaming me?" Thomas sneered. "You're lucky I don't fire you right here." The janitor's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Thomas stepped closer, lowering his voice, not enough to hide the venom, but enough to make it sound personal. "You think wearing that uniform gives you a pass to be sloppy? Let me tell you something, son. You don't belong in a place like this. Men like me build it. Men like you just clean it." The words landed hard. A few employees turned away, unable to watch. Clara's face hardened, embarrassment flashing across her features. "Dad, that's enough," she said sharply. He ignored her. "No, it's not. People like him need to learn there's a ladder in life, and some rungs aren't meant to be climbed." Derrick straightened slowly, meeting his gaze for the first time. His tone was calm, but his eyes carried a quiet warning. "Maybe, sir. But ladders go both ways. Sometimes the man at the top falls faster than he thinks." The line hung in the air like thunder before the storm. A few gasps broke the silence. Clara's eyes widened. "Dad!" Thomas's face flushed crimson. "Did you just threaten me?" "No," Derrick replied. "Just a reminder." Thomas's jaw clenched. "You're finished here." He turned to his assistant. "Get security." "Now." As the young assistant rushed off, Clara stepped forward. "You can't fire him for this." Thomas spun toward her. "You don't tell me how to run my company." While they argued, Derrick quietly picked up his mop and bucket. As he turned, his sleeve lifted slightly, revealing a small tattoo on his forearm. It was old, faded, but sharp enough to recognize. A winged sword encircled by numbers, an insignia used only by a special elite task force. No one noticed. Not yet. Derrick rolled down his sleeve, gathered his things, and walked toward the maintenance door, the echo of his boots steady and composed. The lobby buzzed again, whispers following him out. Who does he think he is, talking to the boss like that? Still, that was brave. I've never seen him lose his cool. Clara stayed silent, her gaze locked on the door Derrick had just disappeared through. Something about that tattoo, the small glimpse she'd caught, tugged at her memory. Later, as she stood in the elevator, she couldn't shake the image. It looked familiar, though she couldn't place it. Meanwhile, in his top-floor office, Thomas Gray leaned back in his leather chair, fuming. No one talks to me like that. No one. He didn't realize it yet, but the man he'd just fired had once commanded soldiers who answered only to generals and presidents. And by morning, he would discover that the janitor he'd humiliated wasn't just a man with a mop, but a man whose name was once spoken with respect in places where courage, not wealth, defined greatness. By the next morning, the whole building was buzzing. What happened in the lobby wasn't just gossip. It was legend. Every department had a version of the story. Some said the janitor had yelled back. Others claimed he threw down his mop and stormed off like a movie hero. But no matter who told it, one fact stayed the same. Thomas Gray had humiliated a man who didn't deserve it. In the staff lounge, clusters of employees whispered over coffee. I've never seen anyone stand that still while the boss screamed like that, one said. He didn't even flinch, another replied. Like he'd heard worse. Clara Gray, standing near the counter, tried to focus on her tablet, but she was listening to every word. She'd replayed that scene all night, her father's rage, the janitor's calm, and that glimpse of a tattoo on his arm. It hadn't been a regular tattoo. It looked official. A woman nearby whispered, "He could have lost his job for that." Clara finally turned. Or maybe he deserves better than that job. The room fell silent. People looked down, embarrassed. Clara sighed and left without another word. Down in the security control room, multiple monitors flickered with live feeds. Mr. Benson, the head of security, sipped coffee while reviewing the previous day's footage. He'd known Thomas Gray for 10 years, long enough to recognize when something didn't feel right. The janitor's composure had bothered him. No fear, no panic, just control. He rewound the video. Derrick Cole, mop in hand, standing straight while Thomas ranted inches from his face. Then, as Derrick turned to leave, Benson paused the footage. There it was, the tattoo. He zoomed in slowly, a winged sword wrapped by a circle of numbers. Benson's blood ran cold. He'd seen that symbol once before. Long ago, on the arm of a man who'd saved his unit. The Winged Vanguard, an elite task force so classified that even their missions were buried in black ink. Only soldiers who'd gone through the hardest, most dangerous operations wore that mark. He leaned back, whispering, "It can't be him." Benson reached for his phone, dialing an old contact from his army days. "Hughes, it's Benson. Quick one. Did you ever hear of a Captain Derrick Cole?" There was a long pause on the line. Then came a low whistle. "You're kidding, right? That man was a ghost, one of the best. Nightfall operations. Saved half an embassy team under fire. He retired years ago." Benson's pulse quickened. "He's working here. As a janitor." "What? I just saw the tattoo." "Then do yourself a favor," Hughes said, voice serious. "Show him respect. You don't want to be on the wrong side of that man." The line went dead. Benson sat there for a moment, staring at the frozen frame of Derrick's calm face on the monitor. "So that's who you are," he murmured. Meanwhile, Clara sat in her office, unable to concentrate. The curiosity had become an itch she couldn't ignore. She pulled up her browser and searched "military insignia winged sword." Images filled her screen, badges, patches, historical references. Then she saw it. Winged Vanguard Special Forces Division. Her stomach dropped. She whispered to herself, "That's it. That's the same tattoo." It didn't make sense. Why would a man like that, someone who'd clearly served in elite military operations, be mopping floors in her father's building? She grabbed her phone, scrolling through the internal employee directory until she found his name. Cole? Derrick. Maintenance. Her finger hovered over the call button. She wanted to apologize, to ask about the tattoo. But before she could, her phone buzzed with a message. From Benson, Security Chief. Message: "Miss Gray, your father wants janitorial coverage in the boardroom for the noon investor meeting. Send Cole." Her breath caught. Noon. That was in less than an hour. She hesitated, typing a reply. "Are you sure that's necessary?" The response came instantly. "Yes, trust me." Clara frowned. Benson never involved himself in maintenance schedules. Something was happening. At that same moment, upstairs, Thomas Gray prepared for his investor meeting. He was in a rare mood, half smug, half irritated. He'd already forgotten Derrick Cole's name. To him, janitors were interchangeable. Tools. He'd assumed the man had quit after yesterday's embarrassment. "Make sure the boardroom looks perfect," he told his assistant. "I don't want another mess like yesterday." As the clock ticked toward noon, the executives gathered. Reporters had been invited to photograph the signing of a major defense contract. A few international delegates, including a retired colonel from Germany, joined the table. Thomas smiled, shaking hands. "Gentlemen, let's make history today." But just outside the door, Derrick Cole quietly rolled his mop bucket down the hall. Back in security, Benson watched the camera feed, his expression unreadable. He murmured, "Let's see how the truth plays out." Clara stepped off the elevator just as Derrick entered the boardroom. She froze at the sight. Her father at the head of the table, Derrick cleaning near the window. None of the executives paid him attention. She could feel her heart racing. Something about the air felt electric, like the calm before a revelation. And she knew, whatever was about to happen in that room, her father wasn't ready for it. The boardroom gleamed like a palace of power. Walls of glass framed the skyline, sunlight glinting off the chrome edges of the massive table where the most powerful men in the company sat. Investors, defense executives, and Thomas Gray himself wearing his usual armor of confidence. "This deal," he announced, gesturing towards the projection screen, "will make Greytech the name the world remembers in military defense. Precision, discipline, and control, values I live by." The room murmured in approval. Every word he spoke fed his ego a little more. Outside, wheels rolled quietly across the marble floor. Derrick Cole pushed his mop bucket through the corridor and into the boardroom. His posture was straight, his expression neutral, his eyes taking in the scene, the suits, the smiles, the arrogance, without judgment. He moved to the far corner, near the panoramic window, and began mopping with quiet rhythm. No one acknowledged him. Thomas continued, pacing the front of the room. "We're also in early talks with our German investors," he said proudly. "A partnership that will secure Greytech's future for the next decade." One of the German delegates, a silver-haired man named Colonel Erich Vogel, leaned slightly toward his translator. Their prototype looked similar to the Vanguard design. You remember, the one led by Captain Derrick Cole? The translator nodded, whispering back in German, "Yes." The American Special Forces commander. Thomas caught fragments of their exchange and smiled smugly. "Ah, you mean the Vanguard initiative?" "Brilliant work, yes, but that was years ago. Whoever this Cole was, he's probably long retired." From the side of the room, Clara's heart skipped a beat. Cole. Her gaze drifted toward the janitor. Derrick's sleeve had slipped just enough for the light to catch a familiar mark. A winged sword encircled by a ring of numbers. Her breath caught. That same insignia had appeared on her tablet last night when she'd searched Winged Vanguard. She looked to her father, still talking, still bragging, and then back to Derrick, who quietly continued mopping, expression unreadable. If you're still watching right now, you can feel that shift when the one they dismissed starts turning the tables. Hit like if you've ever seen quiet strength expose loud arrogance, and keep watching, because this boardroom's about to learn who really runs the room. The glass doors opened softly. Mr. Benson, head of security, stepped inside, a thin folder under his arm. "Sorry to interrupt, sir," he said. "I've got something that needs your attention." Thomas didn't look up. "Can it wait?" "I'm closing a deal here." Benson's tone dropped lower, firmer. "It shouldn't." Thomas sighed in irritation. "Fine, make it quick." Benson stepped closer to the table. "Sir, before you continue, there's something you need to know about the man behind you." Thomas turned, frowning. "What about him?" Benson met his eyes. "That's not just a janitor. That's Captain Derrick Cole, former commanding officer of the U.S. Winged Vanguard Special Forces." For a moment, the words hung in the air like thunder with no lightning. Then whispers rippled through the room. The German colonel stood abruptly, eyes wide in disbelief. "Captain Cole?" His accent sharpened. "You led Operation Nightfall. You saved 27 of my soldiers." Thomas blinked. "What are you talking about?" "That's impossible." Benson opened the folder, sliding a document toward him. "Background check. I verified this morning. Served 15 years, multiple commendations, disappeared from public record 5 years ago." All eyes turned to Derrick. He had stopped mopping. Now he stood upright, hands resting calmly on the mop handle, gaze steady. Thomas took a step closer, confusion mixing with discomfort. You're that Derrick Cole?" Derrick's voice was even. "I was. A long time ago." The colonel stepped forward and offered a salute. "You are a legend, Captain. My men owe you their lives." Derrick hesitated, then returned the handshake quietly. You owe me nothing, Colonel. We all did what we had to do. Thomas tried to laugh it off, but his voice cracked. Why would a man like you be cleaning floors? Derrick looked him straight in the eye. Because peace doesn't need an audience, Mr. Gray. My mother got sick. I wanted a quiet life. The words were simple, but they struck deeper than any speech could. Clara stepped closer, voice trembling. You could have told us who you were. Derrick smiled faintly. People only see what they respect. I didn't need to tell anyone. Benson crossed his arms. Some of us still remember what respect looks like. The colonel nodded. Men like him don't need rank to command it. Thomas swallowed hard, searching for a way out of the humiliation. Mr. Cole, Derrick cut him off gently. Don't apologize, sir. You already showed me who you are. The silence was heavy enough to feel. Executives glanced away, embarrassed. Clara's eyes glistened with guilt and admiration. Derrick leaned his mop against the wall. Titles fade. Power shifts, but character. He paused, looking at Thomas. That's what outlasts everything. He turned and walked toward the door, his reflection stretching across the shining floor. The colonel exhaled slowly. You had greatness cleaning your lobby, Mr. Gray. And you didn't even see it. Clara looked back at her father, who stood frozen in shame. Sometimes, she said softly, you only see power when it isn't wearing a suit. Thomas said nothing. His hands shook slightly as the weight of truth pressed in. Out in the hall, Derrick stepped into the elevator. The doors slid shut. And for the first time, the quiet man who'd been invisible to everyone had finally been seen. Not for the broom in his hands, but for the honor that had never left him. The boardroom felt hollow after Derrick left. The silence he left behind was heavier than any argument could have been. Executives sat in awkward stillness, avoiding eye contact, while Thomas Gray stood motionless at the head of the table, his mind spinning through every arrogant word he'd thrown just hours earlier. Colonel Vogel finally broke the silence. In my country, Mr. Gray, a man like that is treated with honor, not humiliation. Thomas swallowed hard. I didn't know. Benson's voice was firm. You didn't care to know. That stung worse than the silence. Clara rose from her seat, glaring at her father. You talk about discipline and leadership every day, but you couldn't recognize it standing right in front of you. He looked down, guilt spreading across his face. Clara, No, she interrupted softly. You embarrassed him in front of everyone. You embarrassed yourself. Thomas turned to Benson. Where did he go? Maintenance exit, sir. Probably heading home. Thomas hesitated for a moment, then grabbed his jacket. Clear my afternoon. Outside, the rain had started, light but steady, streaking the glass tower. Derrick walked slowly across the parking lot, carrying his mop bucket to the maintenance truck. His uniform was damp, but he didn't hurry. He'd faced worse storms. The roar of an engine echoed behind him. A black sedan pulled up beside the curb. The door opened, and Thomas Gray stepped out, his expensive shoes splashing in puddles. Mr. Cole, he called. Derrick turned, unreadable as ever. You followed me? Thomas nodded, soaked and breathless. I had to. I owe you an apology. Derrick studied him silently. You already gave me your opinion yesterday. It was pretty clear. Thomas sighed, lowering his tone. I was wrong. Completely wrong. I judged you by a uniform, and by my own pride. You judged me because you needed someone to look down on, Derrick replied calmly. That's not leadership. That's insecurity. Thomas flinched. You're right. For a long moment, neither spoke. Rain pattered between them. Finally, Thomas said, I spent my life thinking respect was something people owed me. But you showed me I've been demanding what I never earned. Derrick looked away, his voice low. Then maybe it's time to start earning it. Thomas nodded slowly. I want to make this right. A public apology. A donation to veterans. Whatever it takes. Derrick shook his head. Don't do it for me. Do it for the next man you're about to humiliate. Thomas managed a small, ashamed smile. You really are a better man than I deserve to know? Derrick gave a faint shrug. I'm just a man who cleans up messes, some dirtier than floors. For the first time, Thomas actually laughed, quietly, humbled. He extended his hand. Still, thank you, Captain. Derrick looked at the hand for a moment, then shook it, firm, brief, respectful. Take care of your people, Mr. Gray. That's what real command looks like. As Derrick turned to leave, Clara stepped out from the building doorway, holding an umbrella. She'd been watching the whole exchange. Her father looked at her. I'm trying, he said softly. She nodded. For once, I believe you. Together they watched as Derrick's truck pulled out of the lot, disappearing into the rain, a quiet man, leaving behind a lesson the billionaire would never forget. A week later, Graytech Tower looked different. Not because the glass gleamed brighter or the floors were cleaner, but because something in the air had changed. Conversations were softer, people smiled more, and for once, the CEO didn't walk through the lobby with his usual swagger. The company was hosting a veterans charity event. Cameras lined the marble entrance, banners hung from the rafters, and an entire section of the atrium had been dedicated to honoring service members. At the center of it all stood Thomas Gray, not as the arrogant executive from before, but as a man learning humility the hard way. He adjusted his microphone, hands slightly trembling. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, today isn't about business, it's about gratitude. It's about realizing that the people we overlook are often the ones holding the world together. The crowd quieted. Clara watched from the front row, pride flickering faintly in her eyes. Thomas took a breath. A few days ago, I made a mistake. One that reminded me how blind success can make a person. I disrespected someone who'd done more for this country than I ever will. That man's name is Derrick Cole. A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. Several veterans in attendance nodded, already recognizing the name. Thomas continued. He worked here as a janitor. I saw a mop, not a man. But what I should have seen was courage, discipline, and quiet dignity. He reminded me that greatness doesn't shout. It simply stands tall, no matter what uniform it wears. The audience applauded, genuine and steady. Thomas gestured toward the back of the room. Mr. Cole, would you join us? The crowd turned as Derrick entered, wearing a simple gray shirt and jeans. Nothing flashy, just the calm presence that seemed to command respect without a word. He walked slowly to the front, shaking a few hands along the way. When he reached the stage, Thomas extended his hand again. This time there was no hesitation. Derrick shook it firmly. Thomas smiled faintly. I owe you a public apology, and this company owes you our thanks. Derrick nodded once. Apology accepted. But I didn't do anything special. I just did what every decent person should. Treated people like they matter. The line drew a quiet hum of agreement from the crowd. Clara stepped up beside them, her voice gentle but clear. Mr. Cole reminded all of us that respect isn't earned by title. It's earned by how we treat the people around us. Thomas turned toward the microphone again. To honor that, Greytech will be funding a new initiative, the Cole Foundation, to support veterans returning to civilian life. It's time we gave back to those who gave everything. Applause thundered through the hall. Cameras flashed, but Derrick simply nodded, looking humbled. When the event ended, he walked outside, away from the noise. The city breeze brushed his face. Clara followed him out. "You didn't want the spotlight, did you?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "Spotlights are for people looking up. I've spent enough of my life looking forward." She laughed softly. "You really do talk like a soldier." He looked out at the skyline, quiet for a moment. "I used to think honor was medals and parades. Turns out it's just doing the right thing when no one's watching." Clara smiled. "Then you've got more honor than most." He nodded. "Maybe. But I'm still just the janitor." She shook her head. "Not to us?" As Derrick walked toward his truck, a faint smile touched his lips. He didn't need applause. He didn't need headlines. For the first time in years, he felt seen. Not for what he'd done in battle, but for who he'd quietly been all along. Back inside, Thomas stood by the stage, watching through the glass as Derrick drove away. He turned to Clara and said quietly, "He taught me more about leadership in one day than any book ever could." Clara smiled. "Then maybe you finally earned your title." Thomas didn't answer. He just nodded, humbled. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, casting a clean reflection across the wet pavement, as if the world itself was starting over. Some heroes don't wear medals. Some just carry a mop and leave a lesson that lasts a lifetime. If stories like this remind you that real power isn't in status or wealth, but in integrity, vision, and grace under pressure, hit like and subscribe, so you never miss the next story where quiet resolve turns arrogance into humility, and respect finds its rightful place.